Alim, I'm going to turn this over to you. So China is saying there isn't a problem, choose, and we have no forced labor. So what do you think are the next steps here for American and other international companies that are trying to make sure that there isn't forced labor in the supply chain with a partner that's saying there isn't a problem, and if you think there is, don't do business in China?
And thank you very much, Sunny, for having me on the panel. And at Radio Free Asia for the past 4 years, of course, we have been doing a lot of reporting on China's mass detention of Uyghurs and other Turkic ethnic groups, million or two, even more. And we also covered a number of issues, including the forced labor issues. And China, of course, as Stephen stated, that trying to basically deny that there is no such a thing, while the UN, US governments asking for China to allow them to visit the region with unfettered access. But we see that's not happening. But in our reporting is initially in early 2017, the Chinese authorities suddenly changed its policies toward the Uyghurs and began mass detention of Uyghurs in all areas of the Xinjiang Uyghur Autonomous Region. Then when 2018, the issue of mass detention became a global issue. When it was first raised at the UN about the mass detentions, Chinese government, of course, initially denied that there is such mass detention or such internment or concentration camps. But when this issue became a global issue, China then changed its tune, stating that, we do have the camps, but this is not like internment or concentration camps, but these are vocational training facilities, because these Uyghurs, they're influenced by so-called extremism. So we are bringing them into these facilities. They come in voluntarily. So we teach them about Chinese laws, and we teach them about Chinese language, and we also teach them skills. So at that time, when I started to change their narrative about these camps, what happened was the Chinese government, and especially Chinese companies, began to build factories, different kinds of factories, textile factories, glove factories, hair factories, whatnot, within the camp compounds right next to it, or just a mile or two nearby. And a lot of satellite images came out, could testify those. And also we did targeting reporting on this. For example, in Luop County, Hotan Prefecture, the Chinese government built a special industrial zone. Specifically, there were a number of Chinese companies set up to produce human hair. We did a thorough investigation and realized these hairs came from Uyghur detainees from the camps, because Uyghur women, it's Uyghur tradition, like many traditions, Uyghur women all have long hair. So all these hairs come from this Uyghur women, then come to this Chinese factories that's hiring thousands of people to process and produce the hair, shipped to other parts of China, and then they export to the US, Europe, and other countries. And actually, Brenda, when she was the executive commissioner at CBP, they issued a withhold release order. And when the shipment came to the US port of entry, it was seized and confiscated. And also they forced Uyghur and other ethnic groups in the camp, and they forced them to also to produce PPEs, for example, right after the coronavirus became a pandemic. China also exported a lot of this PPEs to other countries, including UK. We know. So the forced labor issue is a very big issue. While China does its best to deny, but we know, and the international community know, that's a fact. And also at the beginning of the pandemic, for example, in March and April, even May of 2020, when the coronavirus began to spread all over, including the US, we see hundreds, thousands of young Uyghurs who are not detained. They were all transported, shipped, if you will, to rest of Chinese provinces to companies to work in a way in a forced labor regiment. Because when we realize a lot of these Chinese companies, they basically advertise saying, we have 200 Uyghur women. Any company wants it, we can ship them. They'll be treated under like a military regiment, curfew kind of situations, and they will just work like 10, 12 hours a day. They did a lot of this kind of advertising, and a lot of Chinese companies also hire these Uyghurs. That's why we see forced labor is implicated, according to the Australian Strategic Policy Institute. More than 80 global brands, including H&M, Nike, Adidas, that's in a big controversy now, and Apple, whatnot, all the other major companies are implicated with this as well. So when this company is now trying to kind of distance itself or cut off the forced labor implication, like Nike, Adidas, now H&M, and the Chinese government mobilized Chinese people to boycott and attack them, of course, they are in a different situation. So forced labor is a very big component of China's policy of genocide and crimes against humanity that's ongoing against the Uyghur and local population there.
So, Alim, let me go back to what you said about there being Uyghur people being taken to factories in other parts of China. So it's hard, I presume, it's a huge country, how to track that, how to find that. What kind of reporting are journalists? I mean, journalists aren't allowed into Xinjiang or other places, and the restrictions on journalists, as you know, are more. And many journalists have been PNG'd and kicked out of China, including some speakers on this program earlier. Ling Wei from the Wall Street Journal, who spoke for us on this program not long ago, was kicked out of China. So it seems like the more reporters, China is basically saying to journalists, well, either you're going to sort of toe to the nationalist line. The BBC reporter was recently also kicked out. And you're not going to do investigations of things like forced labor, wherever it is, or we're going to make you leave. Where do you see the future? I mean, how effectively, without any outside enforcement, how can we know that forced labor isn't going on in supply chains?
Of course, that's part of China's denial strategy to kick out all the foreign reporters who are really interested in the Uyghur situation, genocide, forced labor, crimes against humanity, whatnot. And we see Chinese government increasingly hostile towards Western media covering on all of these issues. As you state, China basically kicked them out. Latest is a BBC reporter who covered extensively on the Uyghur issue, because China is very scared. China doesn't want the international community to know what it is doing to the Uyghur people. China doesn't want crimes against humanity or genocide or forced labor situation to be reported widely. So that's why China is doing this. And as you stated, it's increasingly hard for Western journalists, even stationed in China, to report on the Uyghur situation. And it's very hard. And also the Chinese government renews their visa per year. So if they report on something about the Uyghurs, then Chinese government doesn't renew their visa, then they can't stay in China, they have to leave. And China obviously is a big country, big market for many American and international media. But that's the way China manipulates, try to at least, Western media. So force them to toe Chinese government line. And if they don't, they kick them out or even harass them, threaten them. For example, just 2 Australian reporters, they fled China just a few months ago because of the threats they faced from the Chinese government. That's how horrible now for Western reporters to report on China in general, on the Uyghurs specifically. And for Western journalists in the US, other countries, to cover China remotely, of course, it's not very easy. It's not also very easy for us at Radio Free Asia to cover what is happening. Although we speak the language, of course, we know the area very well and the people and their mentality. So we do a lot of targeted calling. And that kind of helps us to find out a lot of information. But I think another good thing is for reporters to pay attention is the TikTok China produced, that's a Chinese app. Of course, US is trying to ban that, but a lot of things come onto TikTok. Some Uyghurs, very brave few Uyghurs, a lot of Han Chinese themselves in the Xinjiang Uyghur Autonomous Region. They also produce a lot of videos that actually showcase what is happening locally. And also Chinese media, interestingly, because China is authoritarian, if not a totalitarian state. It's government propaganda. But even in their own media, in the Chinese media, especially reporting on the Uyghur situation, you could see sometimes they go so far, they even reveal a lot of things that they were trying to hide from the Chinese government. For example, recently, a top Chinese university just produced a big report. It was available online for a while until the international community paid attention. And Dr. Adrian Zenz, who is the expert on China's forced labor, he came out with a report based upon the Chinese government, Chinese university report, which basically stated their policy, the Chinese government should adopt a policy of thinning out the Uyghur population from the Xinjiang Uyghur Autonomous Region by relocating the Uyghurs to mainland Chinese factories to work there in a regimented situation so they cannot leave, go back home, or they have to stay there for probably the rest of their lives. At the same time, bring more Chinese settlers to replace them. That report itself also showcased that China is committing, forced labor against the Uyghur population. So these are some of the things I think the reporters can closely watch, and that they can find out a lot of useful things as well too, basically to report. And also, a lot of Uyghurs who were able to flee China, some of them are camp survivors, some of them relatives of the camp survivors, or a lot of Uyghurs in exile, their loved ones since 2017 either completely lost communication with them, or their loved ones, mother, fathers, and wives, husbands, even children are separated from them, or detained in the camps, or sentenced by the Chinese government. So there is this huge resource that international journalists can also reach out to and interview these people to find out what's happening to the Uyghur people, and in spite of the Chinese government efforts to cover up whatever is happening.
Well, thanks so much, Alim.